So we want this to be interactive, so we'll do our best to get a conversation going with you. So, in terms of the work that we're doing, well, why networks and communities of practice? And this map was developed by a guy called Chris Collinson, who's done a tremendous amount of research in the field of knowledge management. In fact, he's often referred to as a knowledge management guru. And Chris is very interested in the way that information flows between people in systems, because really the world is a social system. It's full of people, you know, it's people that make things happen, and it's the quality of the interactions between people that can really bring about successes and or otherwise. So Chris's proposal is that actually in the world of organisational development there are a number of things that interrelate and interact with each other, but actually at the heart of all of these organisational development activities sits learning and communities of practice. So we use that as our sort of orienting framework for the kind of work that we do, and increasingly as we're doing our work both in this country and abroad, we're finding a real energy emerging around networks and communities of practice, because people really do want to come together to learn, share, connect and lead together. So that's just a little bit about us, which really I set out right at the beginning. So beyond April this year, we're still waiting to see really what our allocation is and what our priorities and focus will be. But we do know that we are going to be focusing very much on the 9 priorities that sit in the 2016-2017 planning guidelines that have just been produced, or just before Christmas. If you haven't had an opportunity to have a look at those, you know, if you don't want to read the whole document, I think it's really quite interesting just to Google the 9 priorities and think about where your work sits within that framework. And the reason I suggest that is because often when we're working with networks and network leaders and communities of practice and everything in between, people say actually we're finding it really hard to get support for our network, either support in terms of resources to meet, to get together, IT, social media so that we can continue to be connected, but also permissions almost to take time out to engage in this kind of activity. So thinking about the impact that your network is having and your contribution that you are making in relation to the big ticket items that the health and care system is facing, I think is quite an interesting and purposeful thing to do, either on your own and or with other colleagues in your network. What we'd like you to do first of all, there's a guy called Steve Radcliffe who does a lot of work around finding purpose, finding common purpose, and really that motivational hot button that we all have. So one of the things I'd invite you to do now on your tables is just turn to somebody and share in just 2 minutes what matters to you about networks, communities of practice, and your involvement in communities of practice or networks. So what is it that matters to you? What's important to you? Why is it important? Okay, off you go. Okay, it'd be great if there are a few of you that would like to share the headlines from your conversation. So what are you discovering amongst each other really matters to you about networks and networking? Just go for it.
You talked about the differences and similarities between communities of practice and networks. A few of us will agree that networks can be the relationships maybe that you see in networks, and there are more people that work kind of as observers in networks, whereas communities can emerge from networks when people come together to begin to talk. But then some communities can resemble networks as well, so there are a few shades of grey amongst that.
Yeah, great. Okay, so again, I mean, I don't know if any of you have come across the Health Foundation's research and literature on networks, and there's one that's really good. It's called there are 2 actually. One is Leading Networks in Healthcare, And then the other one is effective networks in healthcare, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the moment. But the effective one proposes something called the 5 C's wheel. And we'll share that with you, but certainly as part of that network, one of the things that they did was explore the different typologies, if you like. It's becoming a whole science now, networks and communities of practice. So, you know, on the continuum of what can you call things that bring people together to do great things, we'll share with you in a moment everything from a network to a managed programme to a social movement and everything that sits in between. So yeah, important to think about what kind of organising form is right for the thing that we're all passionate about and the thing that we're coming together to work together on. Okay, so what's really driving the work that sits behind our work programme? So what we know is that there is a really long, steep, challenging improvement journey ahead. And we hear about it all the time. It's a very hot political football, isn't it, healthcare? And it's something that we're all passionate about. It's something that touches all of our lives. And I'm sure in all of our organisations, we continue being charged to make things safer, be more productive, make better use of our time, think about all of the bigger issues that surround our work, rising demand, rising expectation, issues with recruitment and workforce, demography, epidemiology, all of these things. So what leaders are discovering in healthcare and many other sectors, and we heard this morning from our counsellor, that actually hierarchies don't always push that button. They don't always achieve the impact that we need to achieve. There needs to be a different approach, particularly today with rising expectations and demands of workforce as well. So we need to think outside of the box. We need to think beyond hierarchies and rigid organisational structures and forms. And actually we really need to find ways to reinvigorate and re-energise, as some of you said here, the workforce. And often we need to think about different organising forms and ways of bringing people together in networked or forms or communities of practice. In terms of the research that we did, we spent a lot of time scoping our network programme or our network offer. And what we discovered really were what we call the 4 C's, and I'm sure there are many more. But what we discovered in talking with not only people working in the health and care business, not only working as senior leaders in the system and in other sectors, that the task that the Sustainable Improvement team was setting out to achieve, or at that point NHS Improving Quality, was quite significant and it was quite challenging. The need for a small organisation of around 200 people to build improvement capability at scale was quite a challenge. So what we recognised was that actually we needed to tap into the expertise, the energy and the enthusiasm that exists within the health and care system. And what we discovered was that there are over 100,000 networks or communities or forms of network that exist in the health and care system, and these are expanding at a phenomenal rate. With NHS networks alone, they recruit or approximately 400 new members join every month. And that's because what they discovered and what we're discovering is that because of the number of changes and transitions, that the system is typically fragmented. So if we think that the system is built upon relationships, who you know, I'm sure we all know and have our hot list of people that we go to if we need resources or we need solutions or we need ideas. But through the myriad of changes that have taken place across the system, these connections have been fragmented. Some people have opted to leave the system, new people have joined. So people need to know where to go to connect, to make the best connections in order to help them to do their job and help them to feel a sense of comfort and confidence and courage to enable them to do their job. And that can't often be found in a typical hierarchical line management infrastructure. We also know that, particularly amongst the millennials, there's a different need and expectation today with regard to the way that people connect and work together. And there's a shift towards a more distributed style of leadership over the traditional hierarchical styles. And again, as much as anything, due to the seismic shift in the pace of change. So we know that hierarchies can be slow to respond, but actually network forms and looser structures can respond and adapt more rapidly and can be more flexible to the pace of change. So another key driver. The other thing that we want to do, and we're very committed in doing, is working in collaborations and co-production and partnerships, so that a central organisation doesn't sit over the road in Quarry House developing solutions that it then gives to a system, that often the system scratches its head and said, actually we don't know why you've created this in this way. So for us, working with networks such as yourself and communities of practice and a vast range of other networks helps to make sure that the things that we develop in co-production really do support and help you to address your big network and community of practice challenges. So what do we know about networks? Well, I won't go through this list, but just take a minute to have a look through it. This is what the evidence tells us, and this is what people that work within networks really value and appreciate about their organising form, whether that be more of a structured network that's addressing a particular programme, a social movement, community of practice, or a range of other types of network. But this is what the evidence tells us. But importantly, I think that last one, given the nature of our system, networks reach the places that typical hierarchies can't. I'd just like you to have a look at that list, and in a moment I'm going to ask you to stand up to represent where you think the particular community of practice or network form that you're part of sits on that spectrum. So this is the way that the evidence is trying to categorise networked forms, but what it also tells us is that it's quite fluid. So a group of people that start in one particular place can often, over time, shift to another, depending on the way that their work develops or the need or the cause of their work develops. So could I ask you to stand up if the work or the community of practice that you belong to or lead fits more in the social movement, loosely structured end of the spectrum? Great. Okay, can I ask you to stand up then if your network, and there's quite, you stay standing please, that would be great. If your network, it won't be for long, is, in your opinion, sits more as a managed programme. An example of this I would give you, probably more like the Vanguard programmes, who come together as a networked solution to address a big health and care system issue, but actually have a set of clear objectives and deliverables and some formal roles that sit within it. Oh, thank you. Okay. All right then. So, communities of practice and learning then. Whose network or grouping form fits more in that domain? Okay, so now I'm really intrigued. Those of you that are sitting down, I'd love to hear from you. And thank you, everybody, if you wanted to sit down. But others of you in the room, what questions does that raise for you? And where do you think your group or network or community might fit?
Relationship between what it is that we want to achieve and which level might best.
Absolutely, yes. So we were privileged to be at a conference last year with a number of international thought leaders on the academics and so on thought of networks, and it was fantastic because we didn't think that this existed, but there are lots of people that come together to think about the way that you can best group people, and I think the consensus was actually it doesn't matter where you fit on that continuum, but what matters is whether or not you've got the right kind of organising structure to address the issues that you've come together to address. And when we look at the matrix, I think that will become clearer. Okay, so it's something to think about, and something that Angela talked about this morning when she talked about setting up your community of practice. So, have you got the right kind of leadership, the right kind of facilitation? Have you got access to the kind of resources that you need to really make that network or community fly? Because otherwise you may end up with a mismatch between what you're coming together to do together that you're all passionate about and the way that you're organising yourselves in order to achieve that. So this is us, and our ambition is to try and become a connector of networks and a builder of connections, but also to provide the sort of go-to resource space for people that are working within networks, keen to work within networks, and are leading networks. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. In terms of the kinds of things that we've done, just very briefly, one of the things that we've just launched is our network leadership programme. So we've currently got 50 network leaders from across the country. We've got a northern cohort and a southern cohort. And it's amazing, really, the wealth and breadth of expertise and diversity that this programme has brought together. And that network leadership programme is about to follow through with its second module. In fact, Carol's on the programme, and it explores all aspects of network, and it's a kind of double loop. So it's not only learning about network leadership, but encouraging the conversation amongst this group of people to explore what does the health and care system need to know and understand in order to support networks and communities of practice to do really great work. So we want to be able to distill that as a thought piece from this programme. The network toolkit we'll talk about in a moment in a little bit more detail, but we've also run a strategic peer support programme where we brought together senior clinicians from challenged trusts in the KEO and the CQC trust to work together, a fellows network, so these are people who have done good and great things around quality improvement and quality science, and last week we held our first online 6-hour network out event where we ran a sort of a Twitter chat for 6 hours and also shared information research and short webinars, and we kind of think that's the way of the future because of the limited resource that we may have to continue the work that we do. So that's the 5 C's wheel, and there's the reference to the Health Foundation's work. I'm not going to go into that in any great depth, but I think you'll see the resonance and connection there with the principles that Angela talked about earlier. But it's quite an interesting read if you're wanting to have a look at that at some point, or even just skim through it, particularly thinking about common purpose and then enabling infrastructures. So those two tend to be really key. We've developed a toolkit website, and I'd again encourage you to spend 5 minutes just having a look on that website. It contains a range of things, the latest evidence and literature, snappy summaries, so it's all summarised for you, because if you're like me, reading lengthy documents regularly can be quite difficult, but I like the headlines. The other thing that is on there are a set of health check diagnostics. So what I'm going to invite you to do now is in 2s or 3s on your table, have a look at this matrix. This matrix was, again, developed by Chris Collinson and also a programme that the Health Foundation ran in 2012 called Organising to Connect. And that brought together, again, 50 system leaders that were keen to explore what does it take to create great networks and communities of practice. And what they discovered and what they proposed is that actually, for any community of practice or network, there are 8 key things that you need to pay attention to. And again, not dissimilar to the things that Angela was sharing this morning. So across the top there, you've got the 8 key things, ranging from common purpose through to sustainability and renewal. Then you've also got 5 levels of maturity. So, in essence, there's no real wrong and right here. I'm going to go back to the point that the lady at the back there made earlier. It's about what's right for your particular community or network to enable it to achieve the job that it needs to achieve. So, the theory goes that if you pay attention to these 8 key elements of organising, and you think about what level of maturity does your network or organising form need to achieve in order to do its job really well, then the chances are that your network will be successful. And network success is about a number of things. It's about being up for and able and energised and having the capability and the capacity to do what it needs to do. But equally, it's about knowing when to end that network and knowing when to repurpose that network. Because often networks can fail because they just go on for too long and they kind of lose their focus, and they become they lose their value to the members, and they therefore, as a result of that, tend to lose their impact, and they lose their compelling story. So success can mean a number of different things. So if I could invite you just on your tables in 2s or 3s to have a look at this matrix, and using the green pen that you've got, tick what you believe about the Co-Creation Network. So we're using this network as the sort of framework to think this through this morning. So tick in green what you think is particularly strong about this network, and I recognise that there are a few of you that are new today, and that's okay. An impression will have already been created for you. And then tick in red what you believe is the biggest development need, or the area that needs to be strengthened. And when you're doing that, if you can, think about if it's a success factor, if you think it's something that's really strong and the Co-Creation Network is doing really well, have a think about the level of maturity so that you can just tick it on this grid. So for example, if you think there is a really strong common purpose and clear direction, and that's known and understood by all members, then I would guess that you'd be ticking purpose and direction in box number 5. However, if you think that something that needs to be focused on could be impact and value, and currently you think that that's quite loosely defined, then you could be looking at ticking impact and value in red in box 2. So that's just an example of how you could use this to think about this network, and also to create a conversation amongst members of your own particular community of practice. So if you could just spend 5 minutes doing that, and then we'll invite you to give some feedback.
You can make it what you want.
Yeah, you can. But does it? Yeah, like the way it feels like. And there's probably three more the charter. Other things that they mentioned so far, those values and
Okay, thank you. Just draw that conversation to a close, and again, be very interested in any reactions or thoughts, feedback from your conversations that you've been having. And we will be collecting in the matrix as well, so if you can just leave them on your table, because that will provide some really helpful information to Lucy and colleagues when they're thinking about developing the Co-Creation Network. So, some reactions, feedback, thoughts.
I think this is potentially a really interesting framework that between you to really be able to speak in judgment.
Yeah, people that have used it have found it so, and you can use it in whatever way you choose, really. Some networks use it just as a basis for a conversation to raise people's consciousness around certain elements, and often it provokes one of those aha moments when people say, do you know what, there's something that hasn't felt quite right about this network or my involvement in this network, but having looked at this, I think if we spent more time clarifying our purpose, thinking about the way we organise ourselves, it would be better. So you can use it in a very loose way, or you can marry that with the network scorecard, which you can send out to a cross-section of your members and ask them to complete and bring it back in and see what that generates for you. And on the Network Toolkit site, it produces a little graph that you can use, a visual that can quite easily, readily set out for you the network development needs and the views of your members around, collectively, what do they think are the strengths, where are the areas of convergence, so where do they all agree, and where are the areas of divergence, so where is their difference. And often it's those areas of difference that are fantastic to explore amongst your network. Why does that difference exist? Okay, great. What other comments, reactions, thoughts?
I suppose what you said as a table is impressive, how obviously from a diverse group of people they've all come together to share their time. So there must be some common purpose
Yes.
that everyone's come together. So
Yeah.
that in itself is a big achievement in today's world.
Great, and that's lovely feedback for Lucy and Angela and colleagues that, in a busy world, people value the opportunity to come together in this network because it is of value. So people are getting some value from it. Great. Other feedback?
I just wonder, thinking about the Co-Creation Network, what the difference would be between new people coming into it, their perceptions, and then people that obviously have a better understanding or more involved in the works. And we're curious to explore those differences as conversations.
Yeah, lovely. And, Deming, one of the sort of industrialist and quality gurus, said that all models are wrong and some are helpful. So, it's not an absolute science, but it's something that you can create a good conversation around within your network and can give you some kind of framework to identify where are we doing really well and where could we do even better. And interestingly, we used this with a network in Erasmus University in Holland, and this was a group of 20 people that had been meeting for 15 years. And they had quite a reaction to the matrix because they thought they should be level 5 on everything. They thought they should be really mature, but actually it was amazing what it uncovered. And your point, Angela, about new members, there were some new members in the group, and so there was quite a difference between the new members that had come in, who had had no real guided induction or mentoring into the network, and those members that had been in it for 15 years. And the new members were sitting there scratching their heads thinking, what is this network about, and how can I interact with it? What can I get from it? How can this benefit me? And the older members, not in age necessarily, weren't questioning that because they just valued coming together, spending some headspace with each other. And where we got to at the end of that conversation was this was more of a club than a network. It was some safe space for people to have some time out together, to re-energise, to think, but they weren't necessarily geared or oriented to a common purpose or a set of actions. So just sort of being transparent with your network and network members about what is this network about, why do we all come to it, what do we want from it, and how can we make best use of our time together. And it appeals to all of us. If you think about that Kolb's learning cycle, some of us are thinkers and some of us are doers. Some of us like evidence-based and frameworks, things to hang our theories and ideas and thoughts on. Other people just like it as a very loose indication. So it can be used in a variety of ways. Very powerful with the scorecard that you've got there as well. And just to finally finish off, just to go back to that, Lucy said that you'll circulate the link. There are a number of things that you can do on there, from accessing all of the resources, the health check diagnostics. There are videos up there, there are podcasts on there, which are great, some of which we used last week. But equally, there's a geo map where you can plot yourself and your network, so you can see where there are other networks doing similar things in your area that you might want to connect with. Thanks very much. It's been great to be able to come and talk with you. Great work. Good luck with all of the networking and organising efforts that you're taking forward. Please do keep in touch with Georgie and myself if there's more information that you'd like, or you'd like us to come and talk to your particular network or community of practice or work with you. Thank you.